Hello people of the internet, it's Amanda, and for today's video, we're here to talk about Rurouni Kenshin, the beginning. Now, I've mentioned this in my Rurouni Kenshin, the final video, which I'll be putting a link to down in the description below. But this is something that I've been anticipating, especially after I've seen the final, just because that one didn't satisfy me as much as I thought it would. There are certain expectations, at least in terms of the narrative or the emotional impact of that one, that didn't really meet much of my expectations. I laid out a lot of the other details in that particular video, but then for this one, we're just gonna zoom in on this film, so we're gonna do that. Now, before I start this entire thing, I just want to say, as with my other videos, I usually do these with the perspective of someone who just watched the film at face value. There are like certain review videos that I do where I mention reference materials and stuff like that, and I make it clear whenever I do so. But generally, like, I know that a lot of people who view certain films, they aren't exactly as immersed as other people who've read the manga or watched the anime, and sometimes they just come across films and enjoy it for what it is, and that's the perspective that I'll be coming from in terms of this particular video. So I may be like mentioning the manga or the anime from time to time as I go through this entire thing. But again, I will just be focusing on, my thoughts in terms of how I received the film as it is, as I've seen it. So just to put it out there. So with that said, let's just get to it. We get to the actual review, let's talk about the plot briefly first. So the beginning, as the title suggests, is a prequel to the past 4 films that we've seen so far, and it talks about the life of Arimura Kenshin prior to him being a Rurouni, and it's more focused on his life as Hitokiri Batosai. Now, what's interesting about this is some of the revelations that are, or mainly like the backstory of this entire thing, is actually partially revealed in the final. So I'll be talking about later whether or not, like, how strong the connections are and anything like that. But given that, so some of the characters, at least most of the characters from the past 4 films, do not appear in this particular film. So if you're a fan of like Kaoru and the entire Kamiya Dojo clan, gang in the first 4 films, so they're not exactly in this one. Characters from the past films would be, of course, Kenshin himself and Saito Hajime, who is a member of the Shinsengumi. Other than that, it's mostly about, the life of Kenshin prior to, again, the events of the past 4 films. Now, in here, it also stars Arimura Kasumi as Tomoe, who we've seen in the final. She's referred to more as, Kenshin's wife or first wife, if you will. But we learn through the course of this film that the relationship, it's not exactly as, it's not really more of like a full-on, marriage and everything and stuff like that. It's more of they fell in love along the way. And the whole like wife thing, it's really more of like given the emotional attachment that they've had with each other through the course of the events of this particular film. Now, what I absolutely love about this is, in terms of prequels, like, there are prequels that don't add anything to the story at all. We don't even know why we need it or anything like that. And there are some stories like that, and those stories irk me a lot, because I feel like a good prequel definitely adds more meat to the already existing stories, and it changes the way as to how you view the films that went before it, which the events happen after it, if you catch my drift. And that's definitely the beginning for me. I mean, we know how the story ends because of the past 4 films, and as well as what happened, definitely because of what happened in the final. But you sort of like still want to know what goes on, and when you do, it changes the dynamics of how you will view the past four. Like, definitely when this film ended, I had a sudden urge to like rewatch the entire series again in the first place, which I feel like is what a good prequel does. And I feel like this film definitely delivered on that. Now, more specific details, I would say it's not exactly as action-filled as the past Kenshin films, which is ironic given that it zooms in on the life of Kenshin as Hitokiri Batosai. But what I like about this is it didn't just deliver, you know, blow after blow of like killings after killings, just to establish how fierce he is or why it earned him that particular title or reputation in the past four films that we've seen. What's interesting is, despite the fact that we've seen Kenshin, you know, with his potential, like in his fullest potential as the Hitokiri Batosai, unlike the four films where he's never killed anyone, for this one, we've seen him like just massacre an entire room full of people in just a single scene sequence. But what's interesting about this is it's also zoomed in on the emotional impact of that made his transition from the Batosai to the Rurouni that we've known in the past four films a lot more believable. Like, we see that he's not exactly the cold-blooded killer that people saw him as, or what his reputation stood for, but it was really more of his doing it because of a certain ideal that he has, or a certain cause that he believes in, which is to finally put an end to the shogunate and welcome this new, or in terms of making this new era arrive. And he believed so much in that social political ideal that he was willing to sacrifice his own even his own sort of like personal principles and feelings, or emotional and like giving that certain, you know, judgment towards people who believes otherwise. So it's really more of that extreme goal that drove him into doing what he does as Hitokiri Batosai. So there again, we kind of understand that he wasn't just doing this because he was trained to do so, because he's emotionless and that he was cruel and anything like that and something like that. But it sort of like allows us to understand where his character was coming from and why his past is a certain way. And I feel like the film did a good job in terms of giving us that without necessarily like watering down the fight sequences as well. Now, is this a love story? I would say partially yes, because again, we also saw it's mostly Kenshin's heart out in the open. Like, I feel like we actually saw most of his heart and his emotions and his what made him Arimura Kenshin more so than Hitokiri Batosai in this film alone, as compared to like the past films that we've seen, mainly because this is him in the middle of having all these conflicts. I mean, in the past 3-4 films, he knows what he wants to fight for already. The conflict in terms of how he wants to use his sword was already resolved in those films. And therefore, it was really more of him protecting the people that he cared about. Whereas for this one, it's a conflict of his mission versus his emotions and feelings, or developing feelings towards Tomoe. And there was this thing in the plot where Tomoe was warned that because of the cause that Kenshin was playing, or the role that Kenshin was playing in this bigger sense of things, Tomoe shouldn't do anything to blunt his sword. And that really was a very powerful line in a way, because again, it shows us that Kenshin is capable of these certain changes, given, you know, he's still fully in touch with his emotions. And yeah. Now, in terms of Arimura Kasumi, I absolutely love her. I feel like she's really, really beautiful in this film. It's just that because Tomoe's character is a lot more subtler, there's a certain coolness or reservation to how her character is like, as compared to like Kaoru, who's a lot more expressive. There's a certain like upfront fierceness to Kaoru that is very present. For Tomoe, it's really more of like certain nuances in her character that made her Tomoe. Like, she's more of like the soothing force to Kenshin's hurricane, if you get what I mean. And therefore, I feel like there's definitely a challenge as to how you're going to portray that through very small and very minute actions and words. And that's a reason why sometimes I felt like I'm seeing more like Kasumi playing Tomoe rather than, her melting into Tomoe as a character. I'm not sure if that makes clear sense, but that's how I felt in some of the moments. Like, it's not bad. It's just that sometimes you see the actress more than, how you feel for Tomoe as a character. Like, something like that. And I feel like I'm not sure if there are certain expectations from like the manga or the anime readers about Tomoe's character. It's just that for me, I felt like, I understand why the character has to be portrayed that certain way. It's just that, yeah, I feel like it's just me in terms of like seeing the contrast or seeing like other films from Kasumi already. So that's why there are certain nuances in her acting that just felt very Kasumi as compared to Tomoe. But overall, like, it's not exactly that bad. I mean, I still really, really like her portrayal, and I like her balance. I like how Tomoe balanced out, this entire story. In terms of... Now, this is where it's not really a problem for the film itself. It's really more of just how it connects to the final. I thought that this was going to give me a lot more emotional... a lot more of like an emotional grip, so that I would be able to appreciate the final even more, like when I watch this. And I think I've mentioned this in my The Final video. The reason why I felt so detached to that film was because I couldn't care less about Inishi's revenge and emotions, because I don't really like I don't know, like I felt like I didn't really feel enough of his connection to his sister to warrant everything that he's done in that film. Like, that was my problem with the final. Like, I wasn't emotionally grabbed by the film, and I thought that the beginning would give me that thing where I would understand where Inishi was coming from. But given the briefness of Inishi's participation in this film, and I understand why, because it's not exactly a film about him or his backstory, but rather Kenshin's backstory and his relationship with Tomoe. But again, I felt like this film gave meat to the past 3 films up until The Legend Ends, but not much for the final at all. Like, I still feel, because of this, it just made it glaringly clear for me that the final is the weakest film out of all the 5 films. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not as well made. It's just that, again, as I mentioned in that video, it is good in terms of cinematography, the action scenes, and anything like that. It's just that there's a lacking emotional grip to that film, and the beginning didn't give me reasons to at least like make me want to rewatch the final, given the context of the beginning, if you get what I mean. Now, even with that, watching this film, like the beginning, made me want to rewatch the first 3 films. Especially the first one, because I feel like, given how it really went full circle with this plot, there's a certain difference in terms of how I would view the first film already. So I think that's the good side to it, is you would want to re-marathon like the first couple of films because you've seen the beginning, because it would give you a lot more tug in terms of, what Kenshin went through and why he was the Rurouni that he was in those films. But again, in terms of connecting it, the final just feels like a whole disconnected story, even more so now that I've seen the beginning. Was that a bad film? Not really, but yeah, again, I just thought that watching the beginning would make me like the final a little bit more. But yeah. Now, overall, I absolutely love this film. Another thing that I noticed, and I'm not sure if it's just my imagination or anything like that, but I feel like this film, in terms of cinematography and colors, just felt a lot more like there's a heavier contrast and lesser saturation in a way that gives it a sense of like coldness to it, which I absolutely appreciate because I feel like it fits the vibe of the film. Like whenever there are warm moments between the characters of Tomoe and Kenshin, that's the only time that the film sort of like shifts in terms of the coloring. But overall, it definitely fits the whole coolness or coldness that both Kenshin and Tomoe is feeling, especially given the whole like plot twist with who Tomoe actually is. And speaking of which, I absolutely love the whole poeticness of how, you know, Tomoe's name, Yukishiro Tomoe, and then the pivotal moment that happens between, you know, her and Kenshin happens in a blanket of white snow, and how beautiful that entire scene was. And another thing is, and I'm not sure if this was established as well in the final, but again, like learning about, you know, the whole story with the scar, where it's the first one was done out of hatred, out of spite, and then when Tomoe closed it, it was more of like a symbol of like love and giving Kenshin some closure, which allows him to enter this new beginning that he's had after the entire fight happened and the new world was introduced to Japan. It's definitely a beautiful moment how that entire thing happened. And again, as a prequel, the beginning really delivered that. Like it's not exactly as action filled. There's not a lot of like very complex, you know, action sequences in this one as compared to the final, or at least even with the other first films. But it delivered in a way that the storytelling was really, really good, and it was enough to keep you like just being engrossed in the story, even if you know how it's going to end, because the emotional tug is definitely strong, and I absolutely like that. So yeah. Now, with that said, so tell me down in the comments below, did you like this film? Did you not like this film? What are your thoughts on the connection of this with the final? Like how? Yeah, all of that. Let's talk it out down in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to my channel and you would want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again soon in a new one. Bye!